I have boxes that are being labeled for the various decades of the presence of Filipinos in Chicago.
82-year-old Estrella Alamar has boxes and boxes of photos and artifacts of Filipino Americans throughout the years. Some date back to the 1920s. Alamar has documented Filipino American history in Chicago.
Oh, was this a setup?
Yeah, this is the museum.
Alamar and her husband self-funded a Filipino American museum in Chicago in 1999. It closed after 3 years due to lack of financing. Her home now houses the artifacts.
We were a minority within a minority, but there's very little known about the Filipinos. And because of the extent of history that we have through the pictures and through the papers that my parents collected, we have the root of the foundation of what our history is here in Chicago. Who would get to know about this history if someone did not start to show it?
The Philippines and the U.S. have an intertwined history. After 300 years of Spanish colonial rule, Filipino rebels and Americans joined forces to defeat Spain in the Spanish-American War in 1898. The Philippines became an American colony, and they became U.S. nationals. But Filipino rebels wanted independence from any colonial rule, including America. They declared war on America, the Philippine-American War, but lost in 1902. The 3-year struggle resulted in the deaths of 4,000 Americans and more than 20,000 Filipinos. Waves of Filipinos arrived in America as government-sponsored students or pensionados and laborers after the war.
This is somebody that worked as a bellboy in one of the well-known hotels here in Hyde Park.
Filipinos settled in Garfield Park, Hyde Park, and the near north side of Chicago. There weren't a lot of Filipino women in Chicago in the early 1900s, so it was difficult for Filipino men to find Filipino wives.
Can you tell us about this photo?
You see that the women liked the Filipino men. Mm-hmm. They were polite. The women were very attracted to them.
Illinois allowed interracial marriages in 1874, but the discrimination lasted much longer than that.
And then the sad part of it is that many of these Caucasian women were disowned by their parents.
Alamar was born in Chicago and has seen the evolution of the Filipino community firsthand.
This is another picture in the 20s or early 30s of my dad with another provincial mate. Those that came from the province, they said, "You've got to come here, get your education."
Why Chicago?
It was already developing as a city. During my father's time and my mother's time, they were just working Filipinos, working in the restaurants, elevator boys, hotels, working in the hotels.
Because of her want to preserve that history, Alamar strung a collection of photographs and published one of the first Filipino-American pictorial books in Chicago. It's the first of its kind from the publisher, and it has inspired other Filipino-American books throughout various cities. A majority of pictures in Alamar's book are of everyday Filipino-Americans in Chicago throughout the years. But it also focuses on larger contributions from people like engineer Benito Pitt, who helped build the Bahay Temple and the Conrad Hilton Hotel.
What was it like growing up as a second-generation Filipino-American?
We were American during the week because we were going to school. We were Filipino during the weekends because of all the parties that we always had during the weekend. It's interesting, at that time we were American.
You didn't consider yourselves Filipino-American? You
No,
considered
not
yourself
until
American.
the 60s.
Interesting.
We were really American, and we didn't know the language. Our parents were not interested in teaching us the language because there was no need to learn it.
Assimilation may have played a part in Filipino Americans not learning the languages of the Philippines, but Alamar ensures that this history continues on.
Filipinos who came here, their education was to advance themselves in their occupations. They didn't have that much grounding in history, and so it's taken a long time for them to recognize that history that we do have here as a transition to the history of the Philippines. And it's through your generation that this awareness is coming about.